They watched him as he retired to his quarters. Max Pike followed to help him settle in and ensure he was comfortable. Meanwhile, Dr. Finch looked at Santini with an expression full of scientific questions. "What have you been able to determine about him so far, Doctor? Have you had a chance to perform a preliminary diagnosis?" "Come with me to my makeshift laboratory," Santini replied. "There, I will calmly brief you on my observations. Together, we should succeed in restoring his health. For the moment, his life is in no imminent danger, but time is working against us." Vince Darrow remained alone in the control room of the Star Comet. He approached the observation dome and looked up at the night sky. The stars vibrated with an icy clarity over the Goshun Desert. The waning moon tilted heavily toward the horizon. In a couple of hours, the darkness would be absolute. Tomorrow is the day of the final decision, Vince thought. If nothing had been able to convince the world of the power of the Tecklers until now, the events of High Noon would. They were facing something far more difficult than preventing a war. They had to force a desperate and divided humanity to accept a peace they had not asked for, but which they needed to survive. He remained there until the moon disappeared. As if, with the moon, the face of a woman had also vanished, the beautiful face of a woman with light hair and reddish golden eyes. The giant machinery set itself in motion. For years, the general staffs had been waiting for this moment, with a mixture of terror and cold efficiency. Thousands of emergency drills had proven that the gears turned without friction. One had only to press a button to trigger the chain reaction, now unstoppable, that would erase civilization from the face of the earth. Beijing, 12:30 noon. The president of the Asian Federation signaled to Marshal Wu Sheng, who had assumed supreme command of all armed forces, replacing Marshal Jai Singh. The air in the command bunker was stale, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on one's arms stand on end. Marshal Wu Sheng picked up the telephone receiver, connected by a direct line to the Strategic Operations Center. His voice did not tremble. "This is Pleiades. Squadrons, take off immediately. Alert Level 1. Western Missile Launch Bases. Order to open fire at Range 7. Eastern Fleet set sail. Everything must be over in 10 minutes. All ground troops to atomic bunkers. Await the counterattack. That is all. End." Somewhere, deep within a camouflage silo on the steps, a hand approached the red button. It hesitated for a second that seemed infinite, the last second of the old era. Then a strong thumb pressed it, sinking it deep into its base. A continent shuddered. From hidden launch bases, slender silver torpedoes shot into the radiant blue sky, tearing through the atmosphere with a deafening howl. They lunged toward the sun, and then veered with mathematical precision toward the east or west. Hundreds, thousands of white trails began to weave a web of death across the firmament. In the operational ports, activity was feverish. Squadron after squadron of heavy bombers rose, freeing themselves from gravity to carry their treacherous cargo into the stratosphere. More slowly followed the fleet, with the mission of annihilating any trace of the block's influence, and perhaps to escape the doom that would inevitably fall upon their own docks in a matter of minutes. All of this was happening as planned on the war maps. Only one thing occurred outside of official orders. In the shadows of a communications barrack, a Western agent, sweat pouring down his forehead, tapped the Morse key in rapid succession. The radio signals traveled halfway around the world in a fraction of a breath. Exactly 1 minute and 18 seconds after the Asian thumb had pressed the red button. The same occurred in Washington. General Marcus Cobb gave the final order under the somber gaze of Thomas Hayes. The same machinery, the same horror. It differed in no way from that of the Far East, except that here, the missiles were launched into a night sky, leaving behind trails of fire that vied with the brightness of the stars before vanishing as incandescent dots into the void. Perhaps the Western missiles were a bit faster, but on the scale of total annihilation, a 3-second difference was meaningless. Both sides would strike simultaneously. Only the projectiles from atomic submarines, lurking in the depths of every ocean on the globe, would be swifter, for they had the shortest distance to their targets. Earth held its breath. The apocalypse was in the air, flying at several times the speed of sound. But above them, invisible to conventional radar, the star comet's auxiliary launch began to glow with a bluish light. Kyla watched from her tactical screen with a sneer of contempt. "Primitives," she murmured, as her long fingers brushed the controls of the energy interceptors. It's time they learned the meaning of true power. How much time remained before absolute silence? 10 minutes, perhaps 15. Then, the stopwatch of human history would stop to make way for the end of the world. The Eastern Bloc waited for 2 eternal minutes, watching the feast of fire on the radars. Finally, a cold hand pressed the crimson button there as well. The missiles tore themselves from the ground toward the morning sky, ascending like a legion of exterminating angels. There were thousands of them, a tide of metal and death seeking its place in the firmament. It was then that the subtle and perverse difference from the actions of the other powers became evident. The Eastern Bloc's atomic projectiles did not scatter across the globe. They all shared a single vector, a geometric obsession directed at a single target. If their trajectories were extended on tactical maps, all the lines of fire converged on one precise point on the map. The coordinates where the star comet waited under its energy dome, isolated from the doom looming over the rest of the species. In Moscow, the sun shone with cruel irony. Radar crews at the borders of the vast territory indicated that the Asian Federation's projectiles were cruising through the outermost layers of the atmosphere at an unreachable altitude, with a long way still to go toward the west. None of them threatened the Eastern Bloc's soil. The first missiles from the Western Bloc showed an identical tendency on their route toward the east. Marshal Dmitry Borov nodded to the president with a gesture of predatory triumph. "We have done it. In half an hour, the Asian Federation will be a funeral pyre. The Western Bloc and America will have ceased to exist, and that damned base in the Goshun Desert will be wiped from the face of the earth. Only one power will remain atop the ashes. Us. The art of survival, my dear Marshal," the leader responded with an icy smile. "Nothing more than the art of survival. Only he who knows how to remain neutral until the final breath succeeds in inheriting the world." Then a deathly silence, heavy with unbearable anticipation, descended upon the two men. But it was not only upon them. The silence spread like a shroud over the entire earth. The final minutes before the collapse did not tick away. They crawled, stretching into agonizing eternities. All of humanity held its breath, waiting for the impact that would extinguish all lights. The first polar missiles began their descent, tearing through layers of air that turned fiery from the friction of re-entry. Their trajectories became ballistic, growing steeper until they plummeted vertically toward their targets. They slammed into the ground with blind violence, but there were no blinding flashes, no mushroom clouds. They left behind nothing but small, ridiculous-looking craters, inert holes in the earth that did not exhale even a hint of the promised destruction. Something or someone had extinguished the fire of the gods before it touched the ground. There was no detonation, no atomic explosion, no mushroom of smoke. The apocalypse had dissolved into a deathly silence. Meanwhile, the wave of gigantic intercontinental missiles from the Asian Federation had crossed the Pacific. The explosive power of each one was calculated to annihilate all life within a 100-kilometer radius. For that reason, they had separated during flight, reaching the American continent from the west like a thin and lethal skirmish line. However, failing to detonate over their intended targets, their own inertia propelled them inland until they crashed harmlessly into mountains, virgin jungles, or steppes. Only one projectile from the second wave plummeted, due to a premature engine failure, right into the heart of Los Angeles. It tore through a 10-story building and remained embedded in the foundations, a silent, inert heap of metal. The missiles from the block, launched by General Marcus Cobb, fared no better. Not a single one detonated or reached a densely populated area. As would be confirmed later, they caused only minor property damage, a technical humiliation for the superpowers. In the oceans, the spectacle bordered on the grotesque. The American bomber squadrons, under the command of Major General Ethan Miller, sighted Admiral Han Ming's Asian Federation fleet more than 200 kilometers off the coast. The aircraft carriers and heavy cruisers, the destroyers and submarines, lay motionless upon the surface of a supernaturally calm sea. Major General Ethan Miller gave the attack signal. Although he could not fathom the enemy's passivity, he was not prepared to let the prey escape. But the radios were dead. He received no confirmation of his order, nor any response from his pilots. Then, technical horror seized the air. Without the pilots moving a single finger, the planes began a gliding descent, as if pulled by an invisible magnet. The entire bomber squadron followed the formation toward the water. They were land-based aircraft, not designed for water landings. Everyone scrambled to abandon the machines that were sinking rapidly. Life jackets kept the men afloat in the water. Admiral Han Ming did not give the order to open fire. Instead, he initiated a rescue operation. Boats were lowered, and helping hands pulled the American bomber crews from an ocean that rippled gently, as if asking for an apology. Within half an hour, the squadron had sunk, and the Asian fleet remained there, held by an invisible hand in the soft swell. Ethan Miller and Han Ming looked at each other in cold silence in the flagship's officers' mess. Their mutual hatred, forged by years of propaganda, had been devoured by the fear of something much greater, an unknown force that treated them like children playing with matches. 150 kilometers off the west coast of America, the same thing happened, with the roles reversed. Only one pilot drowned, unable to escape his cockpit in time. The Russian atomic missiles of Marshal Dmitry Borov suffered the most ironic fate. They were snatched from their trajectories by an invisible fist, turned 180 degrees, and returned to their launch bases. With millimeter-perfect precision, they slammed vertically into the ground from which they had departed. Not a single one detonated, let alone approached the star comet. The atomic war had ended before it even began. There were even farmers in the American Midwest and peasants on the plains of China who never even knew what had happened. When they heard about the crashed missiles after communications were restored, they expressed their annoyance at what they believed were failed attempts to send ships to the moon. But later, when the truth began to leak out, when they realized that Major Vince Darrow had stopped the end of the world from his base in the Gauchun, they suddenly fell into an absolute silence. The world had changed in 10 minutes, and humanity had just received its first lesson in galactic humility. Someone had prevented the war. A power had been stronger than the superpowers. He had stood up to them and imposed peace by force. Vince Darrow. But Vince Darrow did not remain the hero of the common people for long. The offense inflicted upon the sovereigns of Earth had been too great. The wound to the pride of those who found themselves toppled, with a technical stroke of a pen, from the throne of their omnipotence, was too deep. The unforgivable act was not the deed itself, but the evidence of their own irrelevance. If a single nation could not break Vince Darrow's unsettling supremacy, then perhaps all of them together, united by resentment, could. With this bitter realization, a feverish diplomatic activity began. The lines of communication, previously saturated with threats, now buzzed with a new and dark solidarity. Beijing to Washington. We hereby express our regret for the misunderstanding that nearly triggered a total war. We suggest an immediate meeting of our leading statesmen. The choice of location remains entirely at your discretion. Beijing to Moscow. The President of the Eastern Bloc is invited to participate in the emergency summit between the Asian Federation and the Western Bloc to take place in 48 hours. Beijing to Washington. Agreed on Cairo as the neutral host for the conference. Washington to Beijing and Moscow. The crew of the Star Comet has been declared public enemy number 1 by the Western Bloc government. We propose to the Federation that once the political situation has stabilized, we coordinate a joint lunar expedition to reclaim what belongs to us. Beijing to the AF Space Research Command. Confidential. Accelerate all efforts for the immediate launch of a new lunar spacecraft. Preparations must be kept under absolute secrecy, even from our new allies. Cairo to Washington, Beijing, and Moscow. Preparations concluded. The heads of state of the great powers will be received with the highest honors. Two days later, in the command room of the Star Comet, we have been officially exiled from the human race. Captain Max Pike complained with an expression so mournful that anyone who didn't know him would have sworn he was about to burst into tears. Public enemies, war criminals. And why? Because we prevented them from turning the planet into a ball of molten glass. Does it really surprise you, Max? Vince Darrow arched his eyebrows with exasperating calmness. By preventing their war, we have reminded them of their own weakness. In Cairo, they have finally signed the pact. The great powers of Earth have allied with the sole purpose of destroying us. Honestly, I couldn't have wished for a better outcome. Nothing better? Have you gone mad, Vince? The whole world is aiming everything they have at us. Listen closely, old friend. Darrow replied, gazing at the vastness of the Goshen through the monitors. No individual nation, under a single flag, should inherit space. Only the human being, as an inhabitant of a single planet, deserves to conquer the stars. This union against us is nothing more than the first step toward a common consciousness for all peoples. Fear has forced them to do what reason never could: unite as a single entity with the help of Krill and the Teklars. We have reached the first great goal. We have united the world, even if it's only to hate us. Max Pike remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of his commander's plan. Outside, on the horizon, the lights of the military camp surrounded the energy dome, forming a ring of steel that now spoke a single language. So, Pike murmured, we are the villains of the story, so that they can be the brothers of the new era. Exactly, Vince nodded. And now that they have a common enemy, it is time to show them that the third force is not just a wall, but a bridge to something much greater. And that is why they are excluding us? Max Pike insisted. That is the price, Vince Darrow declared. Pike scratched the rusty, rebellious bristles he called his hair with a pensive look. Do you think Flip made it back home, safe and sound? I don't know. In any case, his name wasn't mentioned in the official communiques. Only you, Santini, and I are officially public enemies. Nothing is known about Krill yet. That surprise still awaits humanity. Pike pointed his thumb toward the deep blue sky covering the Goshen. Kyla played a magnificent role, I must admit. Without her intervention from orbit, we'd be in a real mess right now. Vince slowly shook his head, his gaze lost in the long-range monitors. No more so than now, Max. The only difference being that, in all likelihood, we would have been the last human beings alive on the face of the Earth. Krill suddenly appeared in the doorway of the control room. His figure, though frail, emanated an authority that seemed to fill the space. In the destiny of your race, I recognize the rebirth of my own, he said in a slow, deep voice. I now see the development of events with total clarity, although, and you should never forget this, incidents may still arise. The danger has not been permanently eliminated, but the first necessary step has been taken. Sometimes, fear is the best therapy for an immature species. But it cannot be so forever, Vince warned with absolute gravity. One day, the unity of humanity must not be a consequence of the terror of the unknown, but a mandate of conscience, a result of logical reflection, and a sincere concern for one's neighbor. It cannot be achieved overnight, but I know it will be so, and I will dedicate everything in my power to contribute to it. Krill placed his hand on his shoulder and said softly, You have already done so, Vince. Perhaps now you are a being that I, who do not belong to your world and come from the depths of the cosmos, would like to call an Earthman. Yes, of course, you are the first Earthman, Vince Darrow. And what am I then? Pike asked, feigning offense. Part of the scenery? The always silent Tony Santini did not miss the opportunity to comment cuttingly. First, you have to be human to be able to become an Earthman, Max. Pike snorted with disdain and set his bulky frame in motion toward the exit of the room. I'm going for a swim, he announced. To the artificial lake in the dome. Santini let him pass, but whispered under his breath as he crossed the threshold. Yes, quite right. Go see if the salt water clears your head. Krill smiled to himself in silence, appreciating the strange camaraderie of these men. But Vince Darrow seemed to have heard none of the exchange. He stood by the observation dome, hands clasped behind his back, staring fixedly at the clear sky. Somewhere up there, the moon traced its lonely orbit around the Earth, guarding the secrets of a millennia-old civilization that now, thanks to him, was beginning to intertwine with his own. The end.